Welcome back. So, for this deep dive, we're looking at material you share with us, focusing on a really complex question.
Yeah, it's a big one. Are people under 18, minors, really ready to make huge, possibly permanent choices about who they are?
Exactly. And the source material we're digging into today argues pretty strongly that maybe they're too young for some of these irreversible identity decisions without uh, quite a bit of guidance.
Right. It seems the author's goal is really about protecting young people while still, recognizing their feelings and experiences are valid.
So our mission here is to unpack all of that. We'll look at the psychology, the social side, cultural stuff, the science, basically trying to understand the potential risks and implications.
We want to give you a clear overview of all the different angles on this.
Okay, let's jump in. First up, the developing mind during those teenage years.
Well, the material points out something crucial. Identity formation isn't like flipping a switch. It's a process.
Like a journey.
Exactly. It mentions Eric Erikson, the psychologist. His idea of identity versus role confusion happens right during adolescence. It's a time for trying things on, exploring.
Like figuring out puzzle pieces.
Yeah, seeing what fits to make the whole picture. It's not meant to be instant.
And the brain science seems to back this up, right? The source talks about the prefrontal cortex.
Uh-huh. That's the part for like long-term playing, impulse control, thinking ahead about consequences.
And it doesn't fully mature until
Well,
when?
your mid-20s.
Yeah, well into the 20s. And there's this study mentioned from Nature Neuroscience back in 2018.
Okay.
It highlights that during adolescence, there can be a bit of an imbalance. The emotional parts of the brain, the limbic system, are really active.
Right, lots of feelings.
But that prefrontal cortex, the rational part, is still catching up. This can lead to more emotional reactions, maybe more risk-taking.
So a teenager might feel something incredibly strongly, an identity, for instance. Absolutely, and those feelings are real. But the brain's hardware for fully weighing, say, the permanence of a medical procedure, still under construction.
It's not about dismissing the feelings, but understanding the neurological context for decision-making.
Precisely. The source uses an example, a teen getting really involved in online gender identity groups.
Oh, okay.
The intense connection and validation there could feel like confirmation of a fixed identity, even if it's part of that exploration phase.
Which connects directly to social influences, doesn't it? Peers are huge at that age.
Massively influential. There's a 2020 developmental psychology study mentioned about how much teens conform to peer norms. It's natural to want to fit in.
So in a really accepting group, someone might adopt labels quickly to belong.
Even if their own deep understanding of what that label means long-term is still developing, it's that powerful need for connection.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's not just peers, right? Culture and family play a role.
Definitely. The source brings up a 2019 study in the Journal of Family Psychology. It looked at how family beliefs and societal expectations shape identity.
What did it find?
Well, it suggested adolescents and families with very strong ideologies often adopt identities aligned with those family values.
So your environment really shapes you, especially when you're still figuring things out. Shows how flexible identity can be then.
Exactly.
Mm.
Which leads the material into a really sensitive area. The potential risks of making big identity decisions early, focusing specifically on gender identity.
Okay. This is where things like puberty blockers and hormones come in.
Yes, and social transition, too. The material does acknowledge the argument that these interventions can relieve real distress. It cites a 2020 pediatrics article on that.
That's important. The distress is real.
Absolutely. But then it pivots to the concerns about long-term effects and the evidence that's still coming out.
So what kind of risks are we talking about? With puberty blockers, for instance.
Well, the source points to potential impacts on bone density. There's a 2022 study mentioned about that maybe effects on brain development and fertility concerns. These are serious long-term health questions.
And hormone therapy.
Those changes are often irreversible. Things like voice deepening for trans men or breast development for trans women, they last a lifetime.
And the possibility of regret is mentioned.
Yes. Citing a 2021 study from Frontiers in Psychiatry that tried to estimate regret rates, it's a factor that needs careful consideration, according to the source.
The source mentions a specific case study here, Kira Bell.
Right. Her experience is presented as an example: puberty blockers, surgery, then later regret, and legal action.
And the argument being made through her story is that she felt she was too young to really consent, to grasp the permanence.
Exactly. It really highlights the potential lifelong consequences of decisions made during adolescence.
It's a powerful example. And it connects to the interplay with mental health, right? The distinguishing exploration from maybe fixing on an identity too soon.
Yeah, it's a fine line. The material brings up a 2019 Lancet Psychiatry study suggesting higher anxiety rates in kids who socially transitioned before they were 14.
Implying that maybe locking into an identity requiring intervention early on could cause its own kind of stress later.
That's the question it raises. Could it lead to more anxiety or self-doubt down the road?
But then there's the other side. Suppressing exploration is harmful too.
Definitely. The source is clear on that, referencing a 2021 Journal of Adolescent Health study. It found higher rates of suicidal thoughts in young people who felt they couldn't express their true selves.
So it's this incredibly delicate balance. Support exploration, but be cautious about irreversible steps.
Right. And this is where the concept sometimes called rapid onset gender dysphoria, or ROGD, comes into the discussion based on a 2018 PLOS-1 study.
Okay, I know that term and the study have been controversial.
Yes, it's important to acknowledge the debate and the methodological critiques it received. The source also mentions a 2022 follow-up study.
What did that suggest?
It indicated that a high percentage of the adolescents identified in the original study as having ROGD also had other pre-existing mental health conditions.
So the idea is that sometimes gender dysphoria might be part of a larger picture of psychological struggle, not necessarily an isolated identity issue.
That's the interpretation presented in the source material, yeah, suggesting it warrants careful assessment.
Which loops back to wider societal pressures. The media, culture, pushing kids to define themselves early.
It seems that way sometimes. The source discusses the role of social media echo chambers, TikTok, Instagram. There's a 2023 New Media and Society study mentioned.
What did that find?
It linked social media use with adopting non-traditional gender identities, often influenced by online figures.
So these platforms can be great for finding community and exploring.
But the source also flags the risk of making quick decisions based on trends or influencer appeal without maybe fully processing it personally.
And it's not just social media. Mainstream media, schools.
Yeah, the source brings up gender identity being included in curricula, and a 2021 report about some schools allowing gender marker changes on records without telling parents.
Raising concerns about parental rights, and maybe encouraging commitment before a young person is fully ready.
That's the concern highlighted. But again, there's a counterpoint.
Right, the danger of being too restrictive.
Exactly. The source mentions a 2020 Journal of Community Psychology study linking very rigid traditional environments to higher rates of self-harm. So extremes at either end seem problematic.
Which really underscores the need for parental guidance, doesn't it?
Absolutely critical. The source stresses how vital parents are in supporting exploration, even though it acknowledges it's challenging for parents today.
There's that heartbreaking statistic from the Trevor Project in 2022.
Yeah, about higher suicide attempt rates among trans youth without supportive parents. It shows how crucial acceptance is.
But the source argues that support doesn't mean a complete lack of boundaries or guidance.
Right. It references a 2019 developmental psychology study showing good outcomes when parents are involved, communicate openly, but also set reasonable boundaries.
And then there's the case of Chloe Cole mentioned.
Yes, her story is presented as an example of a rapid transition with, in her view, not enough parental gatekeeping leading to later regret.
Reinforcing the idea that parents need to be involved in ensuring truly informed decisions.
Which brings us back to the core science of adolescent decision-making.
The idea that biologically and developmentally, minors might just have limits when it comes to these huge, irreversible choices.
Yeah, beyond just the prefrontal cortex, the source mentions cognitive biases, like the illusion of control from a 2017 study.
Meaning teens might feel more certain about their current identity being permanent than it actually might be.
Potentially, yeah. They might underestimate how much they could still change and evolve.
And hormones during puberty play a role too.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
A 2018 study on hormones and behavior is mentioned, linking hormonal shifts to more emotional volatility.
Which could make someone focus intensely on identity-related distress.
That's the suggestion. And then there's the research on desistance.
People who identify as trans in adolescence but don't as adults.
Right. The source cites a 2021 study suggesting a significant percentage of teens with gender dysphoria do desist by adulthood. This possibility of change is a key point in the material.
So looking at real-world outcomes helps illustrate this complexity. The source mentions Jazz Jennings.
Yeah, as someone who transitioned early, socially, and medically, But it also notes her openness about ongoing mental health challenges.
showing it's not always a simple path, even with early intervention.
In contrasting that, there's the 2023 Williams Institute survey data mentioned.
What did that show?
It found a certain percentage of people who transitioned as minors later detransitioned, citing reasons like social pressure or just their self-perception changing over time.
Highlighting that identity can shift and early irreversible changes can become complicated later.
And there's other data presented too. A 2020 study linking early interventions with potentially higher rates of later mental health issues.
That also a 2019 study showing positive outcomes from non-invasive exploration, like therapy or art.
Right. It paints a picture with potential benefits and risks depending on the approach taken.
This naturally leads into the policy and ethical debates happening right now.
Definitely. The source briefly notes policy shifts in places like Sweden and Florida, restricting access to gender-affirming care for minors.
Highlighting that tension between protection and autonomy,
Absolutely. And it brings up the core medical ethic: do no harm.
which connects to the CAS review in the UK.
Yes, referencing its recommendation for watchful waiting, in many cases more cautious approach focused on assessment and non-medical support first.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, the central argument from the material you shared seems to be
That given their stage of development and all these influencing factors, psychological, social, cultural minors, might be too young for irreversible identity decisions, especially medical ones.
and the emphasis is really on encouraging exploration through other means.
Yes, things like therapy, creative outlets, talking, all with strong support from parents and professionals.
And for schools and doctors.
The suggestion is schools should foster open dialogue without pushing labels, and healthcare providers should prioritize thorough mental health assessments.
And it circles back to parents providing guidance that's both understanding and informed by evidence.
Exactly. Empathy plus careful consideration of the long view.
So the big takeaway seems to be supporting the exploration journey carefully.
While hitting pause on irreversible steps, prioritizing long-term well-being, with parents playing a key guiding role.
Which leaves us, and you, with a really big thought to ponder. How do we strike that balance? How do we best support a young person's feelings and their self-discovery while also safeguarding them from choices they might not be fully equipped to make yet? Choices with lifelong implications.
It's a tough needle to thread. There are no easy answers here.
There really aren't. Thank you for sharing this topic with us. It's incredibly important. We hope this deep dive gave you some useful perspectives to think about.